Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 9th of October of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about Zelensky. During the previous 24 hours, he made lots of very important statements. So, this is the first one. Zelensky approved the SBU's plan for special operations against Russia. Regarding our operations, I have approved some plans with the service outlining our asymmetrical response to the Russian war, Zelensky stated in his evening address. So, what exactly Zelensky was talking about? I would like to remind you that during the previous 2 or 3 weeks, Zelensky have been asking the United States of America to provide Ukraine with missiles, with Tomahawk missiles. 3 weeks have passed, and we see that the United States of America haven't sent anything to Ukraine, and most likely they're not going to send anything in coming days. So that is why Zelensky understands that he cannot continue like this, because Russia attack Ukraine every single day using hundreds of missiles and hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, dealing significant damage to Ukraine energy facilities, to transport facilities, and so on. So Zelensky decided, if the United States of America didn't provide us with missiles, we will try to attack Russia with sabotage groups. So this is the first and very important piece of news. The second one is that, according to information we have today, the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, supported the president's decision to send units of the armed forces of Ukraine to other states. So now we see that we have two pieces of the same puzzle. The first one is that Zelensky approved several operations on the territory of different states against Russian, probably, assets. The second one is that now Zelensky can use his forces outside Ukraine on the territory of different states. And the third and very important statement today was made by Western authorities, by Polish authorities more precisely. Poland should not be involved in any extradition operation involving someone who has harmed Russia, head of Poland National Security Bureau. So what was he talking about? I would like to remind you that several years ago, at the beginning of the special military operation, according to information we have, according to first statements that were made by investigation committee, the Nord Stream's pipelines were destroyed by Ukrainian special forces. And now those executors who was involved in that operation are located on the territory of Poland. And Germany currently is trying to take these people to the territory of Germany, then to make additional investigation and probably to judge them. But we see that Polish authorities are saying that we should not be involved in any extradition. So this is very important statement, because this is not just like a statement. This is something like a legal, something like some event that has legal power. So some Western authorities, Western politicals, are trying to tell us that Ukraine can do whatever they like. Anybody in the world can do whatever they like against Russian assets across the world, and they will not be punished, and they will not be judged by the European court and Western court and the NATO countries' court. So this is the thing. So three puzzles, three pieces at the same day about one thing, which means that most likely in coming days, some group, special forces, or some terrorists will attack Russian assets across the world. Furthermore, and the fourth and the most important thing, that the European Parliament has called for Ukraine to be allowed to strike targets within Russia with Western weapons without restrictions. The European Parliament calls for the removal of restrictions on the use of Western weapons supplied to Ukraine against military targets on Russian territory. So this is the resolution. The resolution is not a law that forces European countries to do this, but it seems that somebody at some point will use this resolution, probably first to change their own laws, and then to use this resolution and let's say native laws to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, or to at least to allow Ukraine by providing them missiles to do this. So the situation, as we can see, is very complicated. Ukraine hasn't received Tomahawk missiles, so we believe that in coming days we might see some sabotage operations, let's say in the Black Sea, when Ukrainians will try to destroy some ships of the Russian Shadow Fleet. Ukrainians may try to attack some pipelines in the Black Sea or maybe in the Caspian Sea. And of course, we will always think and we will always keep in our minds the current situation in Transnistria. Zelensky can attack this region as well, just one purpose: to stop Russia to attack the territory of Ukraine. Because if Russia continues, Zelensky understands, the Ukrainian authorities understand that Ukraine will not be able to survive this winter. Most of the population of Ukraine will be forced to leave this state further in the western direction, and army will not be able to survive without population. So the logic is very simple. So Zelensky, that is why, doesn't have any other option. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. Today, the sources are saying that the Russians managed to improve their positions once again significantly on the entire Zaporozhye direction across this area. According to different mappers, the Russians once again managed to improve their positions around the settlement by the name of Poltavka. This information was provided by neutral mappers and by pro-Ukraine resources. We see that the Russians are tightening the news around the Poltavka fortified area, and furthermore, several pro-Russian resources during the previous 24 hours stated that very big and very interesting and very important news are coming from the Poltavka direction. So it seems that in coming days, or maybe even in coming hours, the Russian resources and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, captured this territory. If this happens, this is going to be the biggest disaster ever for the Ukrainians in the entire Zaporozhye direction. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions around the Uspenovka fortified area. Just yesterday, the Russians secured the settlement by the name of Novogrigorovka. We remember the video that was published by Russian resources, where Russians, after very heavy clashes, raised their flags in different parts of the settlement. And today, according to information we have, the Russians moved even further in the northwestern direction. Now the Russians are trying to outflank the Uspenovka fortified area by attacking two villages in this direction, the village of Krasnogorsk and Rybne. Furthermore, today pro-Russian resources published this video. And here we can see how Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, first managed to discover an explosive below the bridge along the river of Yanchul in the vicinity of Uspenovka fortified area. And then Russians attacked this bridge and attacked this explosive, and the bridge was completely destroyed. So this is the bridge that the Russians destroyed during the video that you have just seen. So which means that the Russians are trying to collapse Ukraine logistic, and the most important, the Russians are trying to cut Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of these farms in the northern part of the Uspenovka fortified area from supply and support. Obviously, the supply of this contingent wasn't destroyed completely, but most likely now Ukrainians have no chances to use vehicles in this area. So which means that the Russians in coming hours or in coming days will try to attack these farms in the area of the village of Privilya and the village of Privilya itself. So this village is located on the Russian side of the river, as you can see. And when Russians capture this territory, basically we can say that the Uspenovka fortified area would be cut and cordoned by the Russians as well, because from this very moment the Russians will attack this fortified area from the south and from the northwest. Furthermore, the Russians will establish complete FPV drone control, or maybe the Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over this line. And when everything happens that we have just discussed, then this is going to be complete defeat, and Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. At the same time, the Russians continue their pressure in the area of the settlement of Alexeyevka. This information today was confirmed by neutral mappers. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack Russians with the purpose to slow them down and to stabilize the situation. And for these purposes, Ukrainians are sending more and more tanks and vehicles in this direction. But when Russians see any vehicle in this area, they destroy this vehicle immediately. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians sent a tank with the purpose to attack Russians from hidden positions, but Ukrainians were discovered and immediately destroyed. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the settlement of Vishnyovo. As we discussed in the previous videos, this is a key settlement in this direction. The entire logistic of the Zaporozhye, of the eastern flank of the Zaporozhye direction, currently depends on the status of the settlement. We see that the Russians are trying to reduce the settlement to ruins. Most likely the Russians are very close to the settlement, and obviously in coming days the battle for this territory will begin as well. So Russians, as we can see, continue offensive, and they will not stop because the line Gulay Pole Polya Pokrovska is not the final target of the Russians. Of course, lots of things depends on this line. Depends whether the Russians are able to move through this area very fast or not, and if Russians are able to move through this line very fast and with minimal losses, this can lead to the situation that the Russians will make a decision to bring additional forces in this direction with the purpose to increase the pressure further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank Orekhov and to get as close as possible to the city of Zaporozhye. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Novopavlovka direction. Today we got lots of very interesting updates from this territory, and it seems that this is another strike that the Russians are preparing. So Zelensky prepares sabotage strikes on Russian assets and infrastructure across the world, and the Russians are preparing another offensive operation, and this time in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. We got this information from the open source, and according to information we have, Russia continues to redeploy forces away from the southern Pokrovsk. The 19th Tank Division is now entirely south of Ivanovka, Novopavlovka. 35th, 55th, 74th, and 137th brigades redeployed from southern Pokrovsk towards Novopavlovka. So, as we can see, according to this report, the Russians concentrated huge amount of forces exactly along this line, and most likely the Russians in coming days are going to begin their decisive offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Novopavlovka. I would like to remind you that during the previous weeks we were discussing a lot about the situation in Ivanovka. Currently there are very heavy clashes. The Russians haven't captured the village itself, but the Russians managed to cut physically the road that connects the city of Novopavlovka with the settlement of Gavrilovka and with the mainland. So this road is under complete Russian control. The Ukrainians have no chances to use this. Furthermore, according to information we have, 2 or 3 weeks ago the Russians destroyed the bridge along the TO 428 road between Novopavlovka and Mizhova. So basically the settlement of Novopavlovka was completely cut from supply and support, and now the Russians, I believe, see and they believe that they have huge chances to capture the settlement with minimal losses. So that is why the Russians are advancing in the area of Filia. Today the Russians launched artillery strike on Ukrainian positions in the forest. As you can see, the Russians were using lots of multiple launch rocket systems at the same time. At least during this video we can see 3 or 4 multiple launch rocket systems, and the Russians, according to this video, were attacking the forest to the north of the settlement of Filia. And this is not just an attack, this is an artillery preparation before moving forward and before capturing this territory. So the first task for Russians, of course, is to secure the forest to the north of the river of Volcha, and just after the forest the Russians will continue with Novopavlovka. At the same time we got lots of updates about additional progress of Russians in the area of the settlement of Muravka and Molodetska. Today several pro-Russian resources reported that the southern part of Molodetska was already captured by Russia, and most likely Russians are going to move along the railways further in the direction of Novopodgorodnya, Kolona Mizhova, and Mizhova itself. So this is going to be like a road of attack of the Russian units. And furthermore, currently there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the Pokrovskaya mine. I would like to remind you that Russians entered the Pokrovskaya mine several days ago. After when Russians captured several buildings in this area, the Ukrainians began hunting and attacking Russians with FPV drones. We got lots of episodes how Ukrainians were trying to destroy Russian positions in this area. So the situation is so desperate and difficult for Russians, so that they were forced to call an aviation strike almost on their positions. So here we can see how Russians were bombing the Pokrovskaya mine with FABs. So imagine yourself just 200 or 300 meters in the eastern direction there are Russian positions, and it's obviously a very dangerous situation because 300 meters is nothing, and of course if something goes wrong the Russians could attack their own positions. So the point is that currently there are very heavy clashes, and neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are counting their losses. Both are trying to establish complete control over the territory, because both the Russians and the Ukrainians understand who controls the Pokrovskaya mine, basically control everything in this direction almost until the line M30. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but we see that the situation is very difficult. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction itself. During the previous 24 hours, we also received lots of videos, and most of them we can see how Russians were attacking everything that was moving along main supply lines in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk. So we can see another kill zone area that was created by Russia between Sergeyevka, Grishina, and the city of Pokrovsk itself. Ukrainians are trying to send units and forces with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but it seems that currently Ukrainians have no chances to supply their contingent on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. As for the previous 24 hours, no changes on the ground were recorded in the southern part, and as you can see, the Russians during the previous days were advancing in this area, but they stopped, and we can see this. And furthermore, the Russians not just stopped, the Russians began redeploying of most of their units from the southern part of Pokrovsk in the direction of Novopavlovka. It seems that was something like a maneuver carried out by Russians. First, they improved their positions in the city of Pokrovsk, and they managed to establish control probably over the entire southern parts. That forced the Ukrainians to introduce additional forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, not allow the Russians to cross the railways in the central part. And when Ukrainians did that, the Russians redeployed their units back in the direction of Novopavlovka. And now we believe that Ukrainians currently have huge shortage of manpower and forces in this area, which means that Russians may capture the settlement of Novopavlovka very fast. And if Russians capture Novopavlovka, they will be able to answer the operational space and then to move further in the northwestern direction, deep inside of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And telling the truth, it's going to be very difficult to predict how the situation may develop if this happens. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. We're talking about the area of breakthrough. Today we got several very interesting updates from the Shakhovo pocket. The Russians, it seems, are about to finish the battle for this territory. First, we got report from neutral mappers, according to which the Russians improved their positions in the southwestern part of Vladimirovka. Later, pro-Ukraine resources published their own article regarding the situation in this area, and they stated that Russian armed forces conduct mechanized attack on Vladimirovka. Russian armed forces continue to take advantage of the worsening weather conditions near the line of combat contact. Today, several assaults on Vladimirovka took place. First, 6 motorcycles and at noon 3 armored personnel carriers on Turtle, 1 Turtle, and 2 with landing forces. So the Ukrainians are trying to tell us that the Russians are no longer using their tactics with Sabotage and reconnaissance group. They were not trying to let's say, move through the Ukrainian defense. Now the Ukrainians are trying to tell us that the Russians began using armored vehicles in their attacks, and today another one was carried out in the vicinity of Vladimirovka. And based on this video, based on this report, based on this article, we can make a conclusion that most likely in coming days the Russians will answer even the southern part of Shakhovo. So the Shakhovo pocket collapses, as we can see. Most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time, and it seems that in coming days everything in this area would be colored in Russian favor. And when it happens, when everything happens like this, Russians will be able to get a very powerful foothold under their control, and from this foothold the Russians will be able to begin advancing, which is very dangerous for Ukrainians, in the direction of Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, Drushkovka from behind, from the area which is most unprotected from Ukrainian side. And of course, from this direction the Russians will be able also to begin advancing further in the northwestern direction, deep inside, probably to the border with Dnipro region, with Donetsk region, Dnipro region, and Kharkiv region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation to the south of the city of Konstantinovka. We'd like to remind you that several days ago, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, stated that the Kliban-Bytsky, that the contingent of the Armored Forces of Ukraine in the area of Kliban-Bytsky water reserve was completely defeated and destroyed. And today we start receiving adjustments. Several mappers adjusted their maps in Russian favor. We see that most of the mappers have already colored the settlement of Kliban-Byk, the strongholds around the settlement, and it seems that the Russians will secure this territory in coming days, and most of the mappers will do the same. So the Russians are maintaining the line in this region. I would like to remind you that currently the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over everything along this red line. As soon as it happens, we can say that the battle for Konstantinovka begins as well. The Russians continue hunting and destroying Ukrainian positions across the city of Konstantinovka. This is another kill zone. Hundreds of drones are flying above this area without any chances for Ukrainians to move during the daylight. As soon as Russians see anything in this area, they destroy it immediately with FPV drone. Here we can see another example. Russians during the daylight managed to discover position of the armored forces of Ukraine, and they then attacked this territory with FPV drone. And hundreds of episodes of this type happen almost every single hour. As for the Sivers direction, the situation here also remains tense. The Russians currently are focused on Ukrainian positions in the fields to the south of the city of Siversk, between railways that go from the south in the direction of the city. So there is probably a very powerful stronghold of the armored forces of Ukraine. They managed to create another one in this direction, and now the Russians are trying to break through this stronghold with the purpose to cut and to capture completely this pocket. And right after the pocket falls, the Russians will be able to intensify their assault operations further in the northern direction with the purpose to capture Zvanovka. So as of now, and I'm talking about the southern direction, this village of Zvanovka is a key village in this area. First, the Russians need to capture the settlement before moving further. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians bombed lots of positions and temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine in this region. For example, in this video, we can see how Russians destroyed barracks to the north of Zvanovka. Most likely, the Ukrainians had reserves in this area. Those reserves that Ukrainians were planning to send in the southern direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. As for the Sivers Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians, as we discussed in the previous videos, established complete control over the main supply lines. When they see anything in this area, they destroy it immediately. In this video, we can see how Russians discovered the mortar system of the armored forces of Ukraine, and when they discovered this, they destroyed. So as you can see now, the Russians use FPV drones not just against vehicles and tanks and positions of FPV drone operators. Now the Russians sometimes use their vehicles even against not very important targets, which means that the Russians are over-concentrated their FPV drone operators teams, and they can destroy whatever they like, even not very important targets, just with one purpose: to paralyze Ukrainians. As for the city of Kupiansk, the situation is very critical. Today we got the video that was published by Ukrainian resources from the northern part of the settlement. And here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units in the city of Kupiansk in the northern part. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. So we see that more and more updates, more and more piece of news, more and more events confirm that the Russians are improving their positions. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians began evacuation of their personnel from the territory of the city of Kupiansk and from the Russian side of the river Voskol. The Russians see the situation, and that is why the Russians intensify their attacks on Ukrainian positions and temporary deployment points and logistic roads. Lots of pontoon bridges, lots of places where Ukrainians were trying to evacuate their soldiers were damaged and destroyed by Russia during the previous 24 hours. So the Russians are trying to block Ukrainians on this bank of the river without any chances for them for evacuation. So the pro-Ukraine resources are saying that most likely in coming weeks, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back completely from the city of Kupiansk. Some sources are saying that Zelensky has already ordered to start doing this. And that's it for today. Military of the Summer channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.